Who could claim the title of history's greatest old master forger, achieving sums of tens of millions of dollars, even in the 1930s, tricking art experts, the Dutch government, even the art-loving Nazis, and having a huge property and art portfolio, and amazingly, technically never being caught, only confessing to his crimes to be avoided conviction as a Dutch traitor and collaborator for selling a Dutch old master to the Third Reich. His masterpiece, the Supper Timaeus, being the most expensive painting in the world after the time of sale. By 1967, 20 years after his death, it was estimated that Van Meegeren had con buyers out of $30 million. After World War II ending and stolen paintings returning home to their rightful owners, Dutch collaborators and those who had profited from the war were arrested, and Van Meegeren being accused of selling Dutch masters to the Nazis, confessing that he never sold the Vermeer as a Dutch master, rather that he painted it in the 1930s, and telling the Dutch authorities to x-ray the painting, and underneath there was an image of the Virgin Mary, writing that he never did it for financial gain, rather to prove the critics wrong. During his brief imprisonment, he writes a large document confessing to his methods. Later he is sent to trial and becomes a national headliner, drawing in huge crowds. He even creates a Vermeer with his highly unorthodox method of forgery. Being born in 1889, 10th of October, the same year as Adolf Hitler, the third of 5 children to schoolteacher parents, the young Hans van Meegeren shown an interest in art at an early age, much to his father's disapproval, but later compelling his son to study architecture at Delft University, passing initial exams with ease, receiving drawing and painting lessons, but never sitting the final exam, after deciding he no longer wanted to be an architect, but showing a great natural talent, and his designs for buildings still show great promise. His clubhouse for the Delft Rowing Club are still here today. In 1915, Van Meegeren took a job as assistant to the Professor of Drawing and Art History at the Royal Academy in The Hague. During this time, to supplement his small family that he had started 3 years earlier when he married fellow art student Anna de Voet, Van Meegeren created posters, small painted Christmas cards, landscapes, portraits and still lifes, both being his own creation and legitimate copies of old masters. During this time he had his first taste of success, a small charcoal drawing of a deer, adding the fictional line that it was the favourite deer of a Dutch Princess Juliana, a celebrity royal of the time in 1917, going on to sell the print in huge numbers. Moving into the 1920s, Van Meegeren had started to create a name for himself as a talented portrait artist, taking many journeys, mainly to England and France, but also spending time in Italy and Belgium, painting commissioned portraits from American and English socialites, spending winters on the French Riviera, still at this time signing paintings with his own name, but created them in a 17th century style, contrast to his public exhibitions that were met with mixed results, not helping to further his career, though he had made quite a name in the Netherlands, one critic even saying he has every virtue except originality. Later in his memoirs, during the time of his arrest, he says he turns to forgery to prove to critics that he could be more than copies of old master paintings. Even by the 1920s, standards of art forensics, many techniques and procedures had been discovered on how to detect fakes. By the time of the 17th century, with all painters moving to oil paint, the one test Van Meegeren had to pass was turpentine or white spirit rubbed across the surface of the paint on a cotton bud, and if the painting was any less than 90 years old, the turpentine would lift up the paint. Oil paint taking 3 days to 3 months to become touch dry, but can take decades to fully harden. Van Meegeren would find an ingenious way around this. In the 1910s, modern plastics have made great progress, with most common plastics at the time being used for homemade telephones in the form of phenol formaldehyde, also known as Bakelite. In 1932, Van Meegeren, living in the south of France in a rented mansion with his now second wife, he set about the task of trying to find how to mix the substance with the paint and get it to harden, breaking it down into a fluid and mixing it with the paint and varnish, then the risky procedure of heating the painting over a mixture of open flames and ovens to 100 to 120 degrees Celsius, then rolling over a large cylinder to get the painting to crack. That solved the problem of getting the surface of the paint to become immobile to the turpentine, but not the back of the canvas and the stretcher it lies on. This is where Van Meegeren exploited an old forger's trick of using a genuine 17th century canvas and either stripping the paint off or painting directly over the previous work, which for at the Supper at Emmaus he painted over the top of an old work, going to great lengths, making his own brushes from badger hair, sourcing and mixing his own pigments, leg white, cinnabar, lapis lazuli. His son Jacques, who went on to become a forger and artist, even forging his father's work, years later recalling how the studio stank of lilacs and bakelite, was extremely poisonous to breathe in and most likely contributed to Van Meegeren's early and sudden death at 58, taking 6 years to finalise his method. One of the greatest painters of the Dutch Golden Age being Johannes Vermeer, known for his pictures of everyday life but with a stunning lifelike quality and optical technique, the artist only produced 34 known works, most famous works including The Girl with the Pearl Earring and The Artist at Work, falling into obscurity after his death, with his family pawning off his artworks to pay debts. Many of his artworks were once believed to have been created by Rembrandt. Just a century after his death in 1675, aged just 43, his works would soar in popularity. But where Van Meegeren found a gap in the art market was to exploit the Vermeer expert, Dr. Abraham Breedis. Vermeer's early works are hugely different from his later and more famous pieces and don't possess any of the optical qualities that they go on to display. Dirk Hannemer theorising that must have been missing paintings from this time. Vermeer being almost entirely self-taught, he is thought to have travelled to Italy to learn more about painting, and it was his desire for there to be a missing link between the works that Van Meegeren would go on to exploit, by not copying a Vermeer artwork, but creating an entirely new piece that he felt it would have looked like. First sale in Providence. By early 1936, Van Meegeren had finished his Supper at Emmaus, a highly impressive painting that is held in high esteem today and is very valuable in its own right as a known forgery. Creating the artwork is only half the problem. Any artwork created in the mid-1600s would have a large paper trail, history of its life, and many owners, something it never had as it was a fake. To get around this, Van Meegeren claimed it was from an old wealthy Italian Jewish family looking to liquidate assets and flee Mussolini's Italy. Van Meegeren would use this exact scenario many times. Many art historians with little evidence had theorised that Vermeer studied in Italy, so to them it was possible theory that he painted it when he was there. In 1937, Van Meegeren used a middleman who was a Dutch MP and passed the painting on to Dr. Abraham, who examined it and immediately exclaimed it to be a genuine Vermeer and to be one of his best works, selling for an eye-watering 520,000 guilders, roughly 4.6 million euros in today's money, twice the price for a great Rembrandt, and brought by the Rembrandt Society. Being displayed in a special exhibition as part of Queen Wilhelmina's Jubilee, alongside 450 other paintings, but being the centrepiece of the entire exhibition. With the proceeds of the sale, Van Meegeren moved to the south of France and bought a large estate, hung the walls with genuine old masters. During his short move to France, some of his best forgeries were produced: The Blessing of Jacob, The Last Supper, The Adulterers, all in the style of Vermeer. Van Meegeren also produced some forgeries in the style of Frans Hals. An opulent life. With his staggering wealth he achieved through forging, he moved to the Keizergracht 321, one of the three main canals running through Amsterdam. By 1943, Van Meegeren had completed most of his life's work, earning him $30 million in today's money. He had an immense property portfolio, telling in an interview that he had 52 houses and 12 country estates, large jewellery collection. Even his son, now living in Paris, received a handsome allowance. The former teacher had come a long way from humble beginnings. Tricking the Reichsmarschall. Hermann Göring, a great art lover, along with most of the high-ranking Nazi officials, had extensive art collections, both stolen and legitimately paid for. During the Second World War, while nations were being conquered by the Third Reich, Their art was to be plundered from the governments and private citizens, taken back to Germany for a future Führer museum. Top officials would skim off the top what was the best pieces. Göring took for himself countless Peter Paul Rubens paintings and a prized Raphael that would never be seen lost during the war. In 1942, during the occupation, Van Meegeren's middleman arranged the sale of Christ and the Adulteress to Göring for 1.6 million guilders, vastly more than double his first forgery for the Supra Timaeus, around 6.5 million euros today, and the quality of Van Meegeren's paintings had decreased over the subsequent years, along with his health. He was a chain smoker and drank heavily. The fake was easily spotted with technical analysis, but the picture was never even examined in the way the Supra Timaeus had been. No genuine Vermeer was available to be compared to. The forgery was taken to an Austrian salt mine, along with almost 7,000 looted artworks. Beginning of the end. During the end of the Second World War, in May, while looted treasures were being found and returned to their rightful owners, the corrupt Nazi banker and art dealer Alois Miedel, who was the broker in many of Van Meegeren's deals, he was questioned by the Allies on the missing Vermeers, and during his confessions, the name Van Meegeren came up. On May 29, 1945, Van Meegeren was arrested, charged with aiding and abetting, fraud, coming under the title of Dutch collaborator, threatened with the death penalty if found guilty. Van Meegeren would spend many months on remand awaiting his trial. Van Meegeren's trial started 2 years later, on October 29, 1947, with the regional court in Amsterdam. The trial would be a media sensation. Van Meegeren was even made to replicate a forgery in front of the court, and was widely publicised, captivating the Dutch public, and Van Meegeren going on to be a Dutch folk hero, even to this day. Shortly after, it became clear that Vermeer painting sold to Hermann Göring was fake. The collaboration charges were dropped, but the fraud charges remained, and this is what Van Meegeren would have to battle. In the trial, Dr. Formans was able to break down the composition of Van Meegeren's handmade paints, discovering that his paints contained phenol formaldehyde, essentially 1940s Bakelite, and albitol to harden the paint. One more area where his fakes were not up to par: the contents of the cracks. Genuine old master paintings' cracks are full of centuries-old dust and unevenly distributed genuinely towards the top of the painting as dust falls from above, but Van Meegeren had forced too much modern Indian ink and dust into them. Verdict: an ending to the Dutch conman. After a trial not even lasting 2 weeks, Van Meegeren was found guilty of forgery and fraud. He would receive rather a light sentence of only 1 year. The judges had commissioned a psychological evaluation of Van Meegeren, finding the critics damning of his art in the 1920s caused permanent mental health harm. The judges decided to reduce his prison sentence to just 1 year, in the light of his poor mental and physical health. But Van Meegeren would have the last laugh, even before serving 1 day. While returning home briefly, awaiting being moved to prison, he collapsed and suffered a heart attack on the 26th of November 1947, the last day of the appeal, then being rushed to hospital and having a following heart attack on December 29th, and dying on the 30th at the age of 58. A plaster cast of his face survives today in the Rijksmuseum. Decades after his death, many paintings once thought legitimate would be proven as forgeries, but with hindsight and our modern eyes, Van Meegeren's forgeries are still incredibly impressive today.